Welcome to the Healthcare Voice of the New Right Network. This is Stealth on Health with Mario Nasinovich. Envisioned by the people, voiced by the people, powered by the people, it is everyday people with extraordinary values that make up the New Right Network. Welcome to the Healthcare Voice of New Right Network. This is Stealth on Health. I'm Mario Nasinovich. Joining me for our episode today is a dynamic business leader. She's got over 20 years of diverse medical device, consumer, and pharmaceutical experience in healthcare. Leveraging her background in R&D, marketing, sales, and product development, she has launched over 90 products and services. Her career extends through women's health divisions of Fortune 50 companies such as Johnson & Johnson's, Ethicon Women's Health and Urology, and GE Healthcare. As an entrepreneur, she has founded 2 previous startups and is an advisor to other entrepreneurs, supporting teams through fundraising, strategic planning, and commercialization. Additionally, she has served as an advisor to CEOs, corporate boards, NGOs, nonprofits, and other government organizations. She graduated from Auburn University in textile sciences, concentrating in medical textiles. She earned her Master's of Science degree at North Carolina State University in polymer chemistry. In addition, she earned an MBA from Temple University Fox School of Business. She's the author of 3 publications and the co-inventor of 6 patents. Welcome to the second episode of Stealth on Health, Ms. Allison London Brown.
Hi, Mario. Thank you so much for having me.
It is great to have you here, Allison. I'm certainly looking forward to the rabbit hole that we are diving down into, which I know we've talked about together for the majority of our career. But today takes on a special significance because we're also going to be sharing a special announcement for your current venture. So I'd like to start our conversation off by asking you about the rise of women's health technology. But first, let's inform our audience on some basic definitions. What is your definition of the buzzword Femtech, and do you believe the term is adding any value to the advancement of women's health?
So Femtech for us really is about technology that is directed at females. I know it's used very broadly in consumer world, but we're a medical device and diagnostics company. And so for us, I think it really solidifies our value proposition, and it quickly gives people an understanding of who we are, who we serve, and what they may be investing in. I do think it's also helped to give a new vertical in the VC and private equity world. And so rankings and money has really started to flow into this world of Femtech. But I do think the tech is important. Mm-hmm. And I do think that that term is being applied maybe inappropriately to some things that are not really tech. So,
and we'll discuss that.
Hair care. I'm not sure about those things in terms of tech. So,
no. So, and how do you personally relate to the term Femtech? But certainly, when you started your career, we always talked about women's health. Yep. This has been an emerging term. How do you personally relate to this?
So women's health, it's funny. So when you talk to our advisors and doctors, physicians who are urogynes or specialists, they really hate that term because that's such a big term. That can be anything from health, heart care to cancer care. So it can be any fitness. So I think, really reproductive health was a term that was batted around for a while.
Definitely.
We personally work in down there care. So we are talking about those intimate areas that women finally have started to share and talk about and the challenges they have. So we're really talking about the uterus, the vagina, yes, I said the word, urinary problems, so the bladder, even rectal problems, fertility problems. So for us, Femtech and our world is really that world of anything dealing with those concerns that women have in their intimate areas. I don't think intimate tech would work so well. So
no, that's a whole other category for a whole other show.
Yeah, exactly.
We know women's health issues have long been overlooked by the medical establishment. We know for years that some clinical trials only involve white men. Have we seen a societal shift or a shift in cultural norms, at least here in the U.S.? What's the genesis of all this?
So I do think there's a few major things that have transformed where we're going with women's health and with investments and technology. So if you think back, early 2000s, there was a lot of things going on, but the reimbursement for women's health care in an acute care setting and even in an office space wasn't there. Technology wasn't there. And for purposes of this conversation, again, I am talking about urinary and uterine concerns here. So, you know, then you saw an advent kind of in the mid 2000s of some really interesting technology coming about. I was very fortunate to be a part of many of those changes and how women actually receive care. We moved away from this idea of everyone having a hysterectomy when things were a problem, and started to really diagnose fibroids, polyps, those things that can cause painful sex, they can cause painful periods. And so we had new devices. And then unfortunately, 2008, 9, 10 happened, a lot of lawsuits, and everybody knows about them. And so there was such a maybe stigma in women's health.
Definitely.
People didn't want to touch it. And investors were certainly shying away. I started my last startup in 2013 and didn't raise a dime. And it was around prevention of urinary tract infections. And I think part of it was Femtech was not a name then. It was mostly white men investing, older white men, and that was an icky subject for them. So fast forward to 2016 and 17, you're seeing more and more people talk about these concerns. You've got certainly the Cialis for women out there. You have other things that men are now becoming more involved in when it comes to their wives or their daughters, or even their mother's health. So I think there's a lot of things that changed. One, technology. Two is reimbursement. So in 2017, major changes came by the payers to change how women could receive care and the point of care. So hopefully I just answered your question, because
No, no, it was
so
great. I
much
was just going to let you
happening.
go with it. The
Yeah,
only thing I'll
no,
add is a thank you, because certainly I had the privilege to literally be your wingman during some of those years and advancing some of those incredible solutions. And I don't think I've ever shared this with you, but I think this is an appropriate time to share it with you. My wife, during several conversations, let's call them cocktail conversations, with family members and other friends, has always shared when anyone is bringing up some issue that they may have down there, that I know more about the healthy and unhealthy vagina than people who have them. And I owe that thanks to you, as well as all the opinion leaders that we had to engage over all those years. But no, I do understand that the sector was now coined Femtech, and that was by an individual that it's attributed to, Clue CEO Ida Tin. And really, it was meant originally to encompass software, diagnostics,
right,
products and services that use technology to improve women's health. Now,
right.
that is a definition that it started with. It's expanded from there. In your mind, what isn't considered femtech?
I struggle. I mean, I love skincare and health hair care, so don't get me wrong, but I struggle with seeing that in that tech arena unless it's really something that is either helping women who've had burns or acne, truly transforming your skin either through a biological or a mechanical action. So I do think you have to have tech in there. I think it does have to be software related, it has to be, or medical device and diagnostics related. I'm not sure pharma really applies there because yes,
Okay.
it's technical, but I do think tech is supposed to be about hardware pieces. It's about capital, and even wearables can fit into that. If you look at our kind of where we came from, so fintech, so finance tech
Great
is all
analogy.
about software. It is
Yeah.
not at all about, there is some hardware in that, but it is not about consumer items. Square is a great example of fintech. It's a device that is for financial application. So that's how I would look at it.
And let's talk about financial application here. So, Femtech has really taken the startup world by storm in recent years. Certainly has attracted hundreds of millions in venture capital funding. What we experienced just a decade ago as a niche category certainly is now projected to grow to over 50 billion by 2025. In your opinion, you talked a little bit about what has changed. You talked a little bit already about the tipping point. But why all of a sudden the current strong appetite for women's health and femtech?
I do think technology has driven that, but I also think that there is an outcry by women who are saying, I'm not going to take it anymore. I feel like it's a little bit like Gloria Gaynor that sang that song so many
I Will
years
Survive.
ago. Yes, yeah. So it's a little bit of that. I'm not going to take just some guy telling me what to do. I also, again, I do think it's because the devices have become so much smaller and easier, and that they're more accessible to really the office setting. And if you look at the numerous studies that have been published, but 93 to 97% of women, depending on the study, say they much prefer to be in an office setting for the majority of their health care. And that's everything from your annual exam all the way to surgical intervention. And I think now we can do those surgical interventions in a very safe way, in a very contained way, and in a very comfortable way. And on top of that, you've got the economics that go along with that. So I do think the payers, surprisingly enough, thank you United and Aetna and Cigna and all the blues, because they drove much of this along with CMS to say that doctors could get paid for the work they do in the office. And while gynecologists still are very much about their patients, economics matters, and it's also a tenth or less of the price for the patient. So, for instance, in the state of North Carolina, a hysteroscopy, a 15-minute procedure to go in and maybe extract some tissue out of your uterus just to see, what's going on. Is there something suspicious going on? May cost anywhere between $11,000 to $13,000 for the hospital, and out of pocket for a woman is about $4,000.
Oh wow!
Same procedure, and we're talking a 15 to 20-minute procedure here. Okay. You're out of work all day. You have pre-op and post-op and the whole, outpatient experience. You do have that same thing in your doctor's office. It can be about an hour and a half, and it may cost you just your copay. So such a significant difference in how that care is delivered and where that care is delivered. So I do think that's part of it. And there have been lots of activity in the oncology arena and new ways of diagnosing, along with different devices by small companies like ourselves, and people are taking notice. So venture capital is taking notice. There have been acquisitions since 2014 and on, and a lot of activity in deal flow last year, and I think this year as well. So people are seeing that you can make money in women's health, and that there is reimbursement and revenue to go along with that. But I do believe it starts with the patient saying, I don't want what you're offering me anymore. Right. I need something different. I deserve something different.
How essential is it to educate investors around women's healthcare as Femtech continues to grow? Exactly what you just explained. You've got to explain to a potential investor that more than likely is not a woman sitting in that business meeting. What is it like walking into that type of business meeting where the individuals that you're speaking to, number one, aren't women, number two, don't know about the issues that women are experiencing, and three, may not understand the voice of the patient, whether they've got a mother, a wife, or a daughter that's experiencing this, because maybe there's been some level of detachment or some stigma that's been placed on this, where this is a taboo subject that this potential venture capitalist is not talking about.
Yeah, I should note, for us in particular, my company was funded. Start over. My company was funded entirely by angel investors, which is kind of a unique situation. We've raised
Absolutely.
a little over 6.5 million right now, so not a big chunk of money for a medical device company that's commercial, but it's all in angels, and we have two women's funds that just came in, and these are women for women. So I would say
That's great.
that's
Yeah.
another change that has happened, is that more and more women my age and younger are really trying to say that I have expendable capital and I want to make money with that, and I want to put that towards things I believe in or to help other women. So I do think that that is starting to change, and you're seeing more of that. So, but back to your question, I think, when I go into a room, it's a little bit easier, depending on the audience, because I can talk about the technology. It's a camera. It looks in an orifice, in an organ, like a colonoscopy. They probably have all had a colonoscopy. Maybe they've had upper GI. So it's
Mm.
something they can relate to. I can talk about it in that way. If
So
they
that
do,
analogy is key to
that
draw the
analogy
comparison.
helps. And you
Okay.
keep it, you don't talk about the ick factor. Like, I wouldn't say
Okay.
the word vagina to them. I would say, we're talking about the uterus, we're talking about the bladder. You make a little light of the subject to keep them at ease. Um, but you really, you focus on the technology, you focus on the team, and you focus on how they're going to make money.
That's
I
at the end
don't
of the day. Yeah.
have to get too much into it. If they really want to understand, if they start asking questions, then my answer usually to them is, has your wife ever had a headache and it's maybe not her head? Right?
Very
So
much so.
if sometimes you have to make it personal, and you say, if you've ever tried to be intimate with your wife and it's painful for her, then you understand what we're talking about. And that is the area where we really want to change the thinking of both, of wives and their partners.
No, and I think you are brokering that conversation, whether it be in the boardroom or in the bedroom. And I think it's a real great lesson learned to share that thought of how analogies work, talking about the tech and keeping it depersonalized and keeping it around the tech, as well as then making it deeply personal without talking about the biology. So I think that's
Right.
a real important nuance for anybody watching this that may be an entrepreneur, somebody that is thinking about femtech, maybe has some early angel investors and is starting out. These are some really teachable moments, as I like to call it, and some key takeaways that someone can pick up on. But let's take a step back, because I'm really curious. You said the number that you were seeking for this organization and that you've achieved it largely through the angel investors. How do you determine when you're starting out how much money you actually need?
Wow. So that's a big lesson learned for us, and I'll be very transparent. That's probably where we've made some of our bigger mistakes. So when you look at, the medical device world, I think there's a few things that you always think about. And I always, when I talk to people, I tell them it's the 3 R's:
Okay.
reimbursement, regulatory, and revenue. And you need to sit down and figure out, do you have reimbursement already? Okay. If you don't, you need to add probably $5 to $8 million to your budget to go get a code. Um, what is your regulatory path? So do you need clinical studies? Are you a 510K? Are you a PMA? So those key things really drive what your budget is going to be, and what you're going to need in terms of investment. And then lastly, what's your commercialization or your revenue path? So in our case, we had a reimbursement code. We have several, and we
Great.
fall right in. So we didn't have to do that. Um,
Check that box. That's a huge, huge opportunity.
exactly. Regulatory, we're a 510K, we're a class 2. So, very straightforward path, for the most part. But we are an endoscope. And so we are dealing with the gynecology arm of the FDA, the urology arm of the FDA, because we went for a dual indication. and then the infectious disease or infection control arm of the FDA. So all of those things are really important as you start to look at your budget. So for us, we mapped out, then you look at how many people you're going to need. So resources. So I don't know that this is significantly different than anyone else starting out a business, but I do think that the overhead is not where the money is going to come. You know, it's not about people like you see in a lot of businesses. It's about the funding you're going to need, and not necessarily for development. It's going to be for clinical studies. It's going to be for getting your reimbursement codes in order to even get to commercial. And then when you get to commercial, I think, you know, you've really got to understand what your opportunity is, and are you tapping into a transitioning market? Are you creating a market? And if so, that's big bucks. I mean, big bucks. So when you see people raising $20 and $30 million, that's why. So I think all of that goes into play. But for us, we looked at, okay, what do we think we need? And we were able to raise that with angel investors. But that's also put us at a little bit of a disadvantage. So we did a $2 million raise for Series A. Series B, that's where I made my mistake. I should have raised more in Series B. We went for basically a bridge series, and so should have raised more then. And then for Series C, which we're in now, we're at a $4.2 million raise, which seems, it's, you know, it's medium size. But honestly, VCs, private equity, they don't start talking to you until you're in the $10 to $20 million range. So we're in a tweener state. It's a little bit challenging where we may have a bigger price than some angels want to take on, but we're not big enough for a VC. So we've been very fortunate that we've been able to raise the money that we have the way we have.
So according to the Kauffman Foundation, private tech companies with women at the helm actually achieve 35% higher return on investment than those led by men. But in 2018, companies with all women founders received only 2.2% of the venture capital funding. You weren't able to accomplish the funding task with the UTI device at your prior company, but you have been able to succeed here. How have you been able to overcome all of this?
I do think the difference is we are talking about tech. With UTI, it was I never got the story to a point where people could hear it without, again, having that ick factor.
Right.
You know, you're talking about something very intimate when you're talking about UTIs. And in this case, yes, you are talking about parts, but you're talking about viewing, taking tissue, taking biopsy. It's very technical, very clinical, very dry. So you can keep that kind of concern factor out of the conversation. And I think I also give a lot of credit to my board. And I think people don't understand a board, especially for a startup, their job is to help raise money. And especially in early stage, you need to be out there introducing people, figuring out who your book of business is, and driving for the company. And that is certainly what we found. We had great board members that made a lot of introductions, and people believed in us. You know, I do have a lot of experience. I brought along people who had really good experience as well. So it's not just me. I mean, people are betting on the team.
Right.
They're not betting on the widget. And I think a lot of, you know, scientists, you know, as a former recovering scientist, I think that's the problem. We see ourselves as, you know, great thinkers and great idea makers, but it's a team effort. It's not about you as an individual. So, you know, they believed in what we could accomplish, and we just hit milestone after milestone after milestone, and people got very excited about what we were doing, told their friends, told their colleagues. And in fact, to the point that in the last 3 weeks, we've closed almost $600,000.
That's impressive.
Very quickly. So, you know, I think
amidst everything that's going on right now with the pandemic too, that's just a miracle.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah. So I want to talk about those milestones in a minute, but let's finish up on the Femtech side of things. Sure. And certainly you mentioned the ick factor, but we know the best known categories in femtech are related to menstruation care, sexual health, fertility tracking, which I think most people now know about with regards to the apps and the devices and the technology that's there, and certainly pregnancy care. What are some of the more notable companies that have been founded in the recent years, led by women in these areas that you admire the most, and why do you admire them?
So I think, Mara, that's one of those questions that I kind of think about, and I don't have a good answer,
Okay.
because we don't pay attention so much to um, the, shall I say, widgets and software that are going on. We're talking about surgical care. And so a lot of what we spend our time on is looking at, where is disease state going?
Okay.
Where
Looks like a
are
stay in your lane kind of thing.
staying in my lane for
Yeah.
now, and really looking at what are the things that are needed to continue to drive that transformation in women's health.
Excellent, excellent. So let's talk about it. Your company is among many startups that
Yeah,
certainly have paved the
lots.
way for rapid innovation in femtech. You clearly demonstrated across your career the need for continued investment in the women's health space. This latest adventure, so far, so good. Tell us about some of those milestones since launching the company that has gotten it where it is today.
So we always talk about our strategic pathway, and we share this slide with investors, and anybody who wants to hear me talk about it, I'll talk about it.
Please, please.
So the key ones are, we got our 510K. We were the first scope, we believe, to get a dual indication. So we have hysteroscopy and cystoscopy, so uterus and bladder,
Mhm.
or diagnostic and therapeutic means. So that was the first big thing. You got to get through the FDA. Come hell or high water, you got to get through the FDA. The second big one is going to be IP. So we recently found out, so we have one patent that covers our system, and we recently just found out that we were granted 2 additional.
Congrats.
So our entire platform is covered. The third one is really looking at the expansion of our technology. So we do have multiple accessories that we now have 510Ks on. And then the commercial launch. And again, this is where, if I'm talking to entrepreneurs, I always tell them, you really have to figure this out. I've pivoted 3 times in our company on the commercial side.
Wow.
And I would say, I feel like that's the area that I'm the best in, is the commercial. It's the launching, it's the selling, it's the marketing. And as a small company with no name, trying to talk to physicians, that's a really, really big hurdle. And so I don't discourage anybody, but I do think we tried it with distributors. We tried it with 1099s that worked for me. And it's really hard that way. You really need to have a direct sales force. And I hate to say that because it's so expensive,
Definitely is.
but I,
SG&A.
yeah, SG&A. I mean, I think that's where you shift from, your money is going from the regulatory and the development and the clinicals and moving to salespeople.
Yep.
It's better to have 2 or 3 killers out there that you pay a crap ton of money to,
Sure.
than it is to have 10 mediocres.
No, I
So
agree with
you're
you. And I think
really,
we've seen that shift in every area of pharmaceuticals and biotech and medical device. It's really the people with the most amount of experience and relationships that are more of the aggressive type. I mean, it's been a seismic shift, I think, in the chemical makeup and structure of who are certainly landing those positions and being successful in those positions.
yeah, I think we went through, in sales world, we've been through all these, Miller Hymans and Spin and Challenger, and they're great, but you've got to start with the DNA of the person.
Agree.
And sometimes that cowboy, that lone wolf, or whatever you want to
The
call him,
Maverick.
yeah, the maverick.
Yeah.
I call him the elephant hunter. When you're starting out, you need people that are killers, that are eating and breathing, and they don't sleep. They're out there every single day, and no is not an answer.
Right.
And I would rather have, again, 2 or 3 of them all day long than 50 people on the,
It's the classic 80-20 rule, right?
it
So,
is.
yeah,
It is. And it really, and it's harder for, so think about that as a startup. How do you recruit people like that? How do you get them to say, I'm
they
willing to
have to
take on?
believe.
Yeah,
Yeah. You,
exactly.
you need a very loyal person, someone who's ready to pledge allegiance, and someone who certainly has been successful specifically in the space,
Sure.
whether it be the disease or the technology.
Yeah.
And certainly that's where I'd like to go to next in the
Okay.
conversation. And let's dig really deep into this. This is a population of women that you're serving that you know intimately well. You know their unmet needs. You know certainly a lot about this disease category. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about themselves that may be sitting at home watching this, maybe sitting with their mother or their daughter or their grandmother who are affected by this? The women you're serving, their unmet needs, a bit more about this disease category, and how do we welcome them into having this conversation with their family member, with their spouse, with their doctors? Tell us about this.
Sure. So I think first and foremost, let's just say, what are those diseases? So we're talking about everything from I have a period that goes on for forever, or it hurts when I have, and I don't mean just the normal cramps. I'm talking
Hmm.
about real pain, kind of like a kidney stone, or something like that, or appendicitis. So that's the kind of pain we're talking
Great, great analogy.
um, if you're having, again, we talked about painful intercourse.
Yep.
If, women know their bodies, if it just doesn't seem right, like there's something weird going on, don't ignore that. You need to be checked out. And on the bladder side, it's even a little bit more problematic sometimes with the quality of life. So when you cough, when you sneeze, when you laugh, you pee a little, right?
Yep.
So that's stress urinary incontinence. And that's just, your muscles have given out around your bladder. So it's not a horrible thing. It happens to over 60% of women.
Hmm.
So go get it checked out. Or maybe you feel like you have to pee all the time. That's overactive bladder.
Agree.
Again, there are things that can be done very simply in your doctor's office. So the first thing is recognize that there is something not right, and go get it checked. And then the second thing when you get it checked is, I find it hilarious that we will switch nail salons because we
That's so
don't like
true.
how they did our toes,
Yeah.
but we will let a doctor tell us what to do about our own uterus. We spend a lot of time on breast care, and we should. I mean,
Right.
it's really important, and heart disease and cancer. But your uterus is a central connecting organ of your body. It's in your core, and you need to protect it and care for it like you do your teeth. So I get on my soapbox because I feel like women many times are like, well, I don't need that thing. Let's just take it out. Well, and you got a lot of other problems that can happen when you do
Agree.
that.
Agree.
So I do think the first step, though, is get it checked out, talk to your doctor, tell them all your symptoms. That's what they're there for. If you don't feel that they're giving you good answers, if you don't feel that you're hearing what you need to hear in a way you can understand it, go find somebody else.
No, I think that's incredible, timely, and relevant advice. And you know what? If a woman is presented with these symptomatology and they aren't feeling right, something is wrong. Right now, we have the advancement of telehealth. You don't need to be in a doctor's office to have this conversation. And I think there is something perhaps a little bit more comfortable in having a conversation when you are remote distancing, when you're on a computer. So maybe now is really the time. One of the benefits of being in quarantine, you can have a telehealth a conversation with your doctor. I actually have a telehealth conversation with my internist this afternoon. I'm okay, nothing wrong with me, but just need some refills on some medicine that I take chronically. So I want to be able to have that conversation with him. And it's going to be a quick visit, 15 minutes, and we'll be done. But also, it'll be nice to let him know that, hey, everything's okay, I'm okay, and certainly my mental health, my physical health, everything is going well. And I think that's important here too. There's something to be said about well visits to let your doctor know that you're doing well. And in this case, if something isn't going your way and doesn't feel quite right, I think it's important to begin that communication. Again, bring a loved one, bring a friend, someone that you trust and confide in if you can't express this yourself. And certainly if you're not comfortable expressing it, there's always the opportunity to speak to a nurse who may be doing some of those visits before you actually get to see the gynecologist as well. So I think these are important parts. Now, you shared a little bit about your technology and how it works. And certainly this is not necessarily for a consumer to select and to walk in asking for the brand name of your device. Certainly as various women have their experiences with the gynecologist, they may or may not even know the name of the device. But I think it's important as they're experiencing these issues that they understand how some of this technology works. Can you describe for our audience in very layman laywoman terms, how does the technology work?
So if you go to your doctor and they say, okay, we're going to do a hysteroscopy. So that means, again, it's a tiny camera that goes inside. It's natural orifice, so it's going to go through your vagina, through your cervix, into your uterus, and they're just going to have a look and they're going to see what's happening. They may need to take a tissue sample. Your uterus, you're going to feel some pressure because your uterus is going to expand. They're going to use saline fluid to expand it so they can see the whole. It's kind of like expanding a balloon. So
Visualization.
yeah, so that's what they do, and they look, and then they may take a tissue sample. In our case, so our product is called the Luminel DTX hysteroscopy system, and we've designed it to be very, very small, which means that it's easier to insert, and you may need less anesthesia. So you may ask, okay, what's the anesthesia? So many times they're going to use just what's called a paracervical block, and it's kind of like getting a filling where you get a block in you just get some shots in your gum. So they're going to do shots around your cervix. And I know that sounds weird, but it's very safe. It's very simple. And it just allows your cervix to relax. So, I mean, think about it this way. Your fun fact is I think there's like 87 sphincters in our bodies. I love saying, I just said sphincter on TV.
Sphincter is a great word. I love that we're going to have that on record.
Yeah. Okay. So much like, so your rectum, there's a series of sphincters. Your cervix is also that. So it's just a grouping of muscles, and they have to relax. And luckily our cervixes are, is that the right word? Cervi are very tight. And so when you want to go in and look at the uterus, you do have to relax that. So that is very basic. It's, I don't want to say it's not a big deal, because it, you know, it's going in and looking at you. But the interesting thing is you can be fully awake. It is the only type of therapeutic procedure that you can have a shared decision making with your physician
as to what happens next, almost live.
Live.
Yeah.
So you can watch it while they're doing it, and they can point out, okay, here's this and here's that, and we may want to do this. Are you okay with that? And so, you know, it's a really, it's a very different way of performing these therapeutics. But the good news is that it's the only one that can actually see the inside of your body, and you don't have any puncture holes. You don't have any sutures afterwards. Like, it's, you know, they look and you're done. It's kind of like looking in the back of your mouth.
Sure.
They look and you're done.
So now that's in the uterus. How does it shift in terms of the bladder entering through the urethra?
Yeah, so it's easier. Your urethra is a lot more forgiving. As many people know, they've had a catheter maybe when they've had surgery or had a child. And so it's the same thing. You're just going to go into the urethra. They're going to look at the bladder. they're looking at things like the bladder neck. So think of, again, as a balloon,
Hmm.
and the urethra is a very long balloon neck. So
Very,
that's the
very
part we
appropriate
tie,
visual.
right?
Yep. Yeah.
So just think about that as a long piece of the balloon that hangs off. And so they're going to be looking at that to see if there may be damage. They're going to be looking at the urethra as they go along to see if there's damage. And in the case of overactive bladder, they may use injections within your bladder to actually stop the contraction. So that's just to basically stop your muscles from moving a lot. And so very simple. Most people I know have it done. They don't take a Valium. They don't take anything. They just go in, they have their injections, and they come back out. Again, it's kind of like having an injection in your face. I don't know that it's very less, it's maybe a little bit more intrusive, but
Invasive, yes, but
yeah,
complicated in terms of pain and other. No.
no.
Okay.
No,
Great.
and I am not a doctor, so I must
Yes.
give that caveat. Not a doctor, just play one on TV. So
No, and I think this is an important disclaimer. Yes, the best medical advice that you can receive is from your medical professional. The
absolutely.
conversation that we're having here today is certainly for informational purposes only, and please see your physician, specifically in this case, your gynecologist, your urogynecologist, your urologist, for more details if you are experiencing some of these symptoms.
Absolutely. You go
You
see them and tell them you want
please.
to be treated in their office.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a moment, because I think this is absolutely timely and relevant for this conversation, but also because of the current conditions that we are all living under. But you talked about reimbursement earlier, and the financials involved with that, and certainly many have stated that validation is a key to becoming payer ready.
Yeah.
For your product and for products that are in the medical device space, what kind of evidence is needed for insurers and employers?
So in our case, surprisingly enough, and I think many consumers are always surprised at this, we did not do any clinical studies. So it is not a requirement to show. Really what the FDA is looking for is that you are safe and effective. So you basically can do what you say you're going to do. And in our case, we are looking and treating the uterus. I mean, there's a whole long list of things that they tell you you have to be able to do.
Right.
Um, and so we don't have to prove through a clinical study, but we do what are called validation or design validation, where you are using a model to prove that a physician can use your device and can be used as intended. And so for us, that's to get your FDA clearance. And once we got our clearance, we already fit into the codes. Now, other devices out there today, they may get their 510K clearance, and then they have to prove it to payers that they do fit in the code. And in that case, it's usually, maybe 90 to 100 patients. It depends on if they need long-term outcomes data or if it's just really a quick surgical intervention. I think that the de novo pathway is becoming more popular in device land, especially for surgical implants or surgical techniques where something stays in your body, even if it's temporary. So in that case, it would be, you have what they call a predicate device. So there's a device that's like mine, and I'm saying I'm like that, and I'm proving that I'm like that other device. And in this case, you're saying, yes, there is a device that's like mine, and I'm going to do studies in patients to show that I am like that as well. And so that's called de novo. And it's kind of a 510K plus.
Hmm. And these are all regulatory pathways,
All
and
regulatory.
yes.
And usually once you have that, most of the payers will agree that you fit into that category. I think that there are some cases, especially in the diagnostics world, where payers are trying to understand, okay, so you're diagnosing this. We've never had that before. We've never diagnosed that before. So how do we cover that? Because maybe it's an orphan disease, or it's a one time in a lifetime kind of thing that you have to have done, or it's accompanying a surgical intervention. So I think that we're really starting to see the diagnostics world, especially as genetics.
I was just
And
going to say, we've
genetic
seen that in
testing.
gene
Yeah,
therapy. We've seen that in various genetic counseling
yeah,
and testing and biomarkers. Certainly, we've
exactly.
seen that advance that way. Yeah.
So I think that they're using what has happened in that world and applying it to the medical diagnostics world as well.
Great. Now, you've had some major strategic milestones, true inflection points for value accretion. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what those were and really, in the absence of that clinical trial, which everyone views as the holy grail, how you've proved your value?
Sure. I think first and foremost, we did get a dual indication and we got it very quickly. Which is always that's the question mark in any kind of milestone, is how long can you get through the FDA. But I do think the other one is just that we were able to commercialize, we were able to sell, we were able to have physicians who wanted to use our product. In our case, we have a razor blade. So we have a reusable scope, and then we have a line of sheaths or attachments that go over the scope that enable the physician to do different things.
Oh, fantastic.
Um, and so we have people reordering those. And that's validation. And so I think the biggest inflection point happened, our announcement happened just yesterday. And we have signed an exclusive distribution agreement with Olympus.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, as an imaging company, that's like, you don't get higher praise than that, because
No.
they're the best
They
in
are
imaging.
literally the Mount Olympus.
They are
Yeah.
literally, yeah. So for them to say your image is good, and not just good, but good enough for our brand, I do think that that's really important for us. And not only is it important for that, but we now get access to a nationwide set of reps who really understand the space, who are very passionate about gynecology and women's health, and are really excited about being able to provide the Luminel system to doctors and their patients.
Now, share with us how timely this announcement is with the move to office-based procedures. Why is this more important than ever before with what we're currently experiencing?
Yeah, so as many people know, with COVID, you have seen elective procedures that have been certainly pushed aside in some cases, and delayed. And so what we're seeing now is that as states open up, and we keep a really close track on those states, and the phases that President Trump has laid out with his task force, and Vice President Pence. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. There's also guidance from the gynecology associations in terms of how those phases get applied to gynecology and urology procedures. So the good news for us is that our value proposition and our push has always been, why are we doing these things in the hospital? They should be done in the office. Well, guess what? The hospital's not going to be open anytime soon if you need to have a hysteroscopy done. So very timely. And I think it just, again, it proves the statement that women should be deserving their care in a different setting. And in this case, maybe a not only a safer setting for them, certainly more comfortable, but they can go get the care they need now. So we're seeing states open up. Those elective procedures are funny enough, we call these elective procedures. I don't necessarily know that they're always elective, but these procedures are now being able to be done in your doctor's office, depending on the state that you're in.
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping that as we come out of the current pandemic, that we really try and look at what truly is an elective procedure, because I don't see any of what you're doing as elective procedures. These are mandatory. These are quality of life situations, and certainly you have for your entire career enabled a better path with physicians, with patients, and certainly with payers, with all the technologies that you've worked on. With this, certainly the importance of patients considering these procedures. It's not something that they consider. It's something that they absolutely should be doing. So I don't know how elective they are. And I know certainly the support of various funds, like you had mentioned earlier, the patients themselves, the scientific and medical influencers that are in the gynecological space. They've done a tremendous amount in the recent years to destigmatize many of these disease areas, and I think to bring it into the office or into the private clinic, it certainly makes this a lot more easier, certainly a lot more comfortable in terms of the procedure, but in terms of being able to access this and in a new dynamic way, you now have the distribution team behind you to help support that as well, and that's just a fantastic accomplishment. So congrats again on this partnership. I think I want to shift gears just a little bit with you, and I want to talk about you. And as an entrepreneur, certainly there's an opportunity every day to look at business just a little bit differently. There's been an amazing, a beautiful opportunity for you to change the lives of both physicians and as well as patients now more than ever with your company. We've known each other for 20 years. You've been an unwavering leader in women's healthcare and certainly in terms of innovation. What continues to drive you?
Um, well, as an entrepreneur, you do wonder sometimes what you're doing because you sacrifice a lot. You put many things on hold, um, and it's not just a money thing. You're not just putting your salary kind of things on hold, but it is there are times where you're working 2 to 3 weeks, so you're putting sleep on hold, you're putting
Very
eating
much
on
so.
hold, whatever, right? And so you have to have a very and I'm quite fortunate. I have a husband that is extremely supportive of what we do, but I do think that for me it has always been making an impact in healthcare and believing that I have a God-given purpose to do that, and that it is about something bigger than me, and that yeah, the revenue and the money is great, and I love looking at the numbers, but I think there's a patient behind every one of these stories, and you've heard them. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been there together. When you hear the woman that says, I haven't been able to play with my grandchildren because every time I do, I pee all over myself. And so just, being able to help provide something that helps them is an amazing thing when you hear
Very
those
much.
stories, right? So that's it's very simple. I'm doing this because, not just because I'm a woman, not because I have women in my family, but because I just believe that we need to be looking at the healthcare system, and not just women's health, but the healthcare system very differently, from a cost perspective, from where we're placing risks, where we're placing bets, what gets funded, what doesn't. And I'm a fervent believer in that.
No, and I agree with you. And yes, I'm very thankful that we've been there together, and certainly I know quite intimately what has guided you on your daily process and your progress, both as a business leader as well as a person. And that development is unmatched. So I want to say, as your friend, continue down the path that you're on, because certainly you are guided. And your purpose is certainly aligned with where we all should be in terms of sharing our values and proudly saying what we believe in. And you are doing God's work in what you're doing. And you know what? If you could put your head on the pillow every night, knowing that you're doing that, knowing that you're creating good, knowing that you're facilitating the change that's needed in and beyond healthcare, then I think we can sleep really easily, knowing that we've spent the day the way our Lord has intended to. Now,
Exactly.
now your impact. Most people have heard now your story. They've heard the story of this incredible company and certainly this incredible technology, and really your viewpoints on it. But your impact has always extended beyond healthcare. And you've shared this with me. You've always been dedicated to the community around you. You've been personally invested wherever you lived, your time, your focus. Why is that such an important part of who you are and what makes you successful today?
Yeah, I think for me, giving back is, helping other people achieve their dreams. And it's, typically it is with other people who are looking at starting a company. And it's not just in healthcare, it's in a lot of different sectors. People who are looking to start a business, people who are, young people, people my age who are really trying to understand how do they do this? They have an idea, they have a dream. And so I think it's exciting for me. I am not a teacher. I don't have the patience to be a teacher. God love our teachers. I'm not a nurse or a doctor, but I feel like in my small way, I can help the community by helping those individuals find ways that they give back to that community. So, and it's tough because you can get yourself spread really thin, really fast, and that could be a full-time job. I think the other thing is, and I shared this with you earlier, is that, the same quarter that we started this, or I was brought into UVision360, we decided to work with a group and we planted a church. So we had this parallel path of a startup going along. And let me just tell you, I'm not sure which is more difficult, but they're both very rewarding. And it's been a wonderful thing to see our little flock grow, and serve in a different way.
God's work in the boardroom and God's work
Right.
certainly in the community.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about this, but I think it's important that our viewers also get your insight on this. And we talked about how as we begin to restart some of these elective procedures or procedures that shouldn't be defined elective, let's call it that for now until we find a better word, those that have been canceled due to coronavirus disease. What are your thoughts in terms of our next steps, and how can we really provide safe passage to necessary care for patients?
Wow, that is a very big question, and it's a conversation that my team and I have on a regular basis. Honestly, I don't want to, put anything against the people that are making decisions. I don't want, I'm not here to be a
I'm
talk.
happy I'm not making that decision.
Yeah, exactly. I am not
Yeah.
talking head. And I'm not also saying that, the deaths that we have had are not tragic. But I do think you have to look at it and you say, okay, so a lot of the deaths have been in nursing homes or older patients.
Mhm.
That's a fact. And those who are not older have had comorbidities.
Very much so.
So I do think as a nation, well, as a globe, we have to look at that and say, okay, these viruses are not going to go away. There's never been a vaccine for another coronavirus.
No.
There's just not been. There's not a vaccine for SARS. We can barely contain malaria, much less, SARS. So, and I'm not trying to be fatalistic. I just think that's a fact. And so how do you help people with these comorbidities manage themselves better? I do think that there is personal accountability that you say, okay, I am not going to go out because I know I'm at risk. I'm not going to be around other people who may put me at risk. Great. That's a great way to do it. I think in terms of getting back to a normal life and getting back, especially to taking care of your health, there are measures you can take. And honestly, a doctor's office is probably one of the cleanest places there are.
We certainly hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you don't touch the magazines. I mean,
Well, I think they're all getting thrown
they're all
out.
gone. They're all
Well,
gone.
okay.
No more magazines in the waiting room. So bring your own book.
Yeah.
But they sanitize everything. All the doorknobs are sanitized. Patient care rooms are sanitized. So I do think that they're some of the safest places you can go, especially, and I mean, honestly, OBGYNs, it's not like they're treating flu patients. So, maybe GPs is a little bit more risky if you have comorbidities, but I would think going to your OBGYN is not as big of a challenge when it comes to those things.
Well,
I if a politician was listening to me, I would just say we desperately need to open back up this country, though, because companies like mine are at risk of not making it because and I don't, the PPP helps, but we're just kicking the can down the road to the 20 and 30-year-olds who are going to have to make up that amount that we just added to the debt. So,
absolutely.
I think we've got to open up the economy. And I also really think that we take personal accountability. And then lastly, we have to look at this not from a politician's perspective, but from a lessons learned. Get some engineers in there and look at this whole thing, or some statisticians, and say, okay, when this happens again, because it will happen again, what do we do differently so that we don't halt the economy, halt the growth that this country is experiencing, all the good things that we can do as America? How do we do this differently and more safely, maybe next time, but not impacting our economy?
So data driven, but not as debilitating, if I can sum up your thoughts.
Exactly.
So I agree. I think the personal accountability part is critically important as we provide safe passage, and that's just not on the patient. That's not just on the provider. That takes all of us. That takes the entire community. So I agree with you. We have been home here in New York since February 24th, and that's a mighty long time. But you know what? I always think about I've got a lot of accountability here to myself, to my loved ones, certainly my extended family members, in case they ever need our help. I know that I have not been in contact with anyone that could potentially put them at risk, knowing that I would probably be okay, but maybe the older members of my family would not be. So I think
testing
that's
has to
important.
go. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got to have more testing, though. I mean, I do believe that there's a lot of us that have the antibodies that have been exposed. I mean, in February, I was in California with people from Italy and China. So, and then I went to Boston right after that. So I do
Wow.
think, I never got sick, God bless, but,
Yeah.
who knows? So I think testing has got to be spread everywhere, especially the antibody testing.
Absolutely, and let's stay on this topic as we come to a close here. Certainly, on a deeply personal note, many of us have lost colleagues and family and friends, and some have seen the passing of public figures that we admire. Have you lost anyone that you've admired during this unprecedented time? Who were they? What was their influence on you or your career? Can you tell us a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, I've been fortunate that in my immediate family, we haven't lost anyone. I have a cousin who's actually was married to the nephew of Little Richard.
Oh,
So he just passed, but it wasn't COVID related. I think it's not the big figures. It's not, some of the names that we've heard. I think it's it's the grandmothers, it's the aunties that have, and abuelas that have raised many of us. And in our own team, we've had people whose loved ones have been very sick and impacted by this condition. And I think on the other side of it, we've had people who have been laid off and now their company's gone. So I think this certainly is going to extend to beyond just a health concern, but also a financial concern for people. And that company is not coming back.
that is
So,
the case.
loss is measured in a lot of different ways.
Let me open up the floor to you, Allison, for the final word. What would you like our viewers to know?
I think what I would like them to know is, number one, if you're an entrepreneur, go out there, be bold, but find good people, be honest with yourself of what you can do and what you can't do, what you're good at, what you're not good at, and surround yourself with people who can do those things. If you're a person who has extra money, I know that's a strange thing to say at this time, but go find someone to invest in. It could be your time, it could be cash. But if you're a retired business person, go help an entrepreneur
Agree.
because they will take your help. And I think lastly, it's what we talked about before. If you are a woman and you have problems, go find a doctor and make sure that they listen to you. Make sure that they're not just saying, oh, it's stress, which a lot of things, stress is not to be discounted. It can really impact your health, but make sure that you are being heard. And if you're not being heard, go find someone else.
For New Right Network, Allison London Brown, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mario Nasinovich. I invite you all to follow us across social media at Stealth on Health, all one word, across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and certainly to access this episode and other on-demand programming from Stealth on Health, I'd like you to visit newrightnetwork.com, the right voice right now. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to the Healthcare Voice of the New Right Network. This is Stealth on Health with Mario Nasinovich.